In 2014, a huge single came out around the fall of that year. The song was called Shut Up and Dance, and it was done by a band called Walk the Moon. That song was everywhere for the rest of that year, especially leading into summer 2015, because it was such a good party song. You know, whether it was young or old, that song started to get major airtime. It accumulated in Walk the Moon, getting that song topping the charts, especially in the alternative songs charts. But even in the regular billboards, it made the top 10, top 20, and top 30 in almost 10 countries around the world. In America, it spawned them to be able to perform on the late night talk shows. And it really accumulated in them performing the song at the American Music Awards in November of 2015. In those awards, that song had also caused them to be up and running for New Artists of the Year, Favorite Pop Group, and Favorite Artists under the Alternative section. What happened to Walk the Moon? And what was the lead up even accumulating up to that point? A lot of people wonder, and I know I myself have even wondered this as well, if Walk the Moon kind of fell into that category of just up and coming in the wrong period of time. You know, because again, you have to remember this was the mid-2010s. I always like to think that if Walk the Moon came out probably 5 or even 10 years earlier, they would have achieved massive success. But sadly, it's just not meant to be. So again, we're going to answer the question, what led up to Shut Up and Dance? And then what happened afterwards to kind of cause them to fall where they're at right now? And is even that a bad thing? So Walk the Moon initially started coming together in 2010. They started to get airplay for a track called Anna Sun. Now, a lot of people, especially in the indie rock world, know that song first before Shut Up and Dance came out. Now, they started releasing their music independently, and then eventually they decided to sign on to a major record label. They started touring almost immediately because of the hit of that first album that was called I Want, I Want. They performed with Group Love, Panic at the Disco, Weezer, and local natives as well in that year. Now, the lead single, as I said before, Anna Sun, actually became a huge hit in the summer of 2011. And I remember that's when it especially started to get a lot of radio play. A lot of people started hearing them. A lot of people started mentioning them. So if you fast forward in 2012, that's when they decided to kind of remix and re-record a lot of that album, and it was re-released as Walk the Moon, a self-titled album. So their song, or their album, had a couple of songs that was very, very big, such as Quesadilla, Tightrope, and they got a little bit of a boost as well in popularity because they started to get a lot of songs played on video games, you know, which is only starting to broaden their audience. They reunited with Panic at the Disco in This Is Gospel tour around the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. That brings us kind of back up to 2014 now. So you have to imagine this period of time. You know, they're still young. They released maybe you could say an album and a half at this point because they did a small EP as well. And they were just starting to get radio play. So 2014, like I said, they released Shut Up and Dance. It became a hit in almost 20 countries around the world. They started touring for it. They released a second single off of that called Different Colors that also did very well too. And though they were up for awards at the American Music Awards, they did not win any awards for that period of time. But, you know, it's not a big deal. They were up and coming anyway. They did a rendition of the Ghostbusters theme song, so they were included in that. And everything just seemed to be going extremely well for them. So it was that big third album, right? That really was going to be, if this was going to break them fully into the mainstream. So in 2017, they recognized this and they released the album What If Nothing, and that included the lead single One Foot. And honestly, I love this album personally. I think it might have been one of their most solid albums straight through. A lot of solid hits on it. Again, they toured right away. And they even were announced to be the opening act of Muse in the early 2019. Now, again, all of those are great things, and they're touring and they're starting to, get a good solid fan base in support of them. But it almost is like that moment of time with Shut Up and Dance caused kind of like that crest of a wave, and it just kind of started winding down for them. So in 2019, they released a couple of singles, and they were starting plans for a tour again. And then they were even starting at the end of 2019 to want to look to record another album. But of course, end of 2019, beginning of 2020, that's when the pandemic hit. So to respond to that, they started mixing the album. They were all working separately in isolation. They were doing stuff on Zoom, but they didn't have a timeline. They didn't have a timetable for that album. And you can't blame them for that. It was all hard during that time for musicians anyway. Fast forward to December 2020. Because again, you might be remembering at the beginning of this video, I said that there was the beginning, the lead up to Shut Up and Dance, and then there was almost the fallout of Shut Up and Dance. And one of their core members, Ray, it was announced on Instagram that he was no longer going to be a part of the band. Now, that was huge because it had pretty much been the four of them together ever since their college days when their first EP came out. Now they're all in their mid to late 20s. So almost 10 years together now, if not 10 years. And he was released. Now, I did some digging on social media. I did some digging on Reddit as well. And it is kind of scary, so I'm going to say at least what the fan theory is, but there is no concrete proof of this yet. Some people are saying that there was some predatory behavior on his part. Now, honestly, I hope that's not true, especially for the victims and even for himself, but, that is what I dug up on quite a few spots as well. But again, let it be to whatever happened with him. And honestly, he's no part of the band right now anyway. The band did not open up at all as to why they had suddenly released him. Like I said, they just did that post, and that was that. And then in July 2021, they released their fifth album called Heights. They released a couple albums after that, but that kind of ends it. Because sadly, in middle of July 2023 of this year, they released a video on their main channel, your YouTube channel, saying that the band is going on an indefinite hiatus. This was made by their lead singer, Nicholas Patricia. So that's it for Walk the Moon, at least for now. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll start touring again. Maybe they'll look into making an album. But, I'd love to hear what you all think about this. Because honestly, like I said, my theory about a lot of indie bands that came out in the 2010s, it was almost too little too late. The style of music, especially popular music, really changed in the 2010s. A lot of it geared toward hip hop, which is not a bad thing. But the indie rock phase kind of ended at that point. Now, I'm hoping that it gets a revival. I would love to see it happen again. And a lot of the indie bands that became strong in the beginning of the 2000s and then hit their stride in the 2010s, they were able to kind of keep their own thing going. But, it's almost like they got Shut Up and Dance, they got the momentum going, and then sadly that style of music just kind of faded away. And then, of course, they had the kind of fallout with their own band member there. So that's it for Walk the Moon. A great flash of a band. I really hope they get to do more things. But I'd love to hear the comments on you guys. Do you guys listen to Walk the Moon? What are some of your favorite songs from them? And what do you think happened that kind of caused the end of Walk the Moon? This is the Indie Grounds podcast channel, and I will talk to you all later.